You ever wonder why less than 15% of the world's population feels the need to control 100% of the narrative? Because when you're a genetic outlier, born from a recessive mutation with a ticking clock on your DNA, you have to lie to survive. Let's get into it. Modern Europeans carry between 2 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's confirmed by peer-reviewed journals like Nature, Science Advances, and Cell. The Neanderthals were not some mystical master race. They were cold-adapted hominins who lived in caves, scavenged for food, and operated in small, isolated groups. They weren't the future. They were a failed branch of the human tree. And those Neanderthal traits still show up in their descendants. Lower sociability, higher aggression, light skin and light eyes, red or straight hair, high pain tolerance, shorter limb ratios, and a disconnection from nature's rhythms. They weren't creators, they weren't builders, they were survivors of harsh, sun-starved environments until they weren't. They died out, not because they were killed off, but because their own epigenetic behavior, their limited fertility, isolationist tendencies, and lack of social cohesion couldn't sustain their species. Their extinction is a warning, not a blueprint. So how did they live on? Through interbreeding with Homo sapiens. And that's where modern Europeans come in. The Neanderthal ghost genome lives inside them today. And ironically, that same genetic signature they carry is the very thing they now weaponize to claim superiority. But here's where it gets deeper. Even some East Africans, like Ethiopians, show slightly elevated Neanderthal DNA. Not because they interbred directly with Neanderthals, but because of Eurasian backflow. Invaders from the north came back down into Africa, carrying their DNA, trauma, and mutations with them. And even then, their percentage is far lower than what you see in white Europeans. Sub-Saharan Africans, Indigenous Americans, and Melanesians, their levels of Neanderthal DNA are negligible to non-existent because the most melanated peoples of Earth didn't need to survive the ice by digging holes. They were already thriving in cosmic alignment with Earth, Sun, and Spirit. And speaking of alignment, let's talk skin. The light skin mutation in modern humans is recent, very recent. Studies from University College London show that the SLC24A5 and SLC45A2 gene variants responsible for pale skin didn't even exist until about 6,000 years ago. Before that, even in Europe, the original populations had dark skin, dark eyes, and curly hair. In fact, Cheddar Man, a 10,000-year-old skeleton found in England, had very dark skin and blue eyes. Let that sink in. Whiteness did not exist when the first civilizations were rising, which means the founders of Kemet, not white. The builders of Sumer, not white. The mound builders of Cahokia, not white. The creators of the Indus Valley, China's Shang dynasty, Olmecs, Inca, and Maya, not white. So when people ask, what did white people build? The answer is simple. They didn't build. They inherited. And when they realized that their numbers were small and their genes recessive, they panicked. Enter eugenics. Let's name names. Francis Galton, the father of eugenics, cousin to Darwin. Charles Davenport, eugenicist who pushed racial hygiene policies in the US. Harry Laughlin, architect of sterilization laws. Ernst Rudin, Nazi eugenics leader supported by American funding. The Rockefeller Foundation and Carnegie Institution, they funded the research, the labs, the policies. They all pushed the lie that white was not only right, but endangered. So they legislated it, sterilized non-white women, separated babies from their parents, and drew bloodlines to try and purify the impure. Why? Because they saw what was coming. You can't keep a mutation alive when the earth is healing. When the sun returns to its cycle, when people of color reconnect with their power, when rhythm, not reason, guides the future. And now they're saying everyone has melanin. Cute. But next time, let's break that down. Because not all melanin is created equal. There's a reason they study eumelanin, neuromelanin, and pheomelanin separately. There's a reason they mine melanin from fetal tissue in animals. There's a reason they patent it, and there's a reason why, despite all their technology, they can't synthesize the real thing. So no, this isn't just science, it's spiritual warfare through biology. And day 7, we're gonna talk about why they fear the sun and what it means for the end of their timeline. They say it's a myth. They say it's hate. But when you trace the science in the scriptures, what you find is a pattern too precise to ignore. 6,000 years ago, according to the teachings of the Nation of Islam, a brilliant but misguided black scientist named Yaqub began an experiment on the island of Patmos. Not just a science experiment, an agenda. He wanted to engineer a new people by isolating the lightest traits in our gene pool, generation after generation. Through selective breeding, he began grafting out the dominant traits of original people: melanin, compassion, connection to the divine, and left behind something else. A being with little pigmentation, recessive traits, aggression hardwired through scarcity. And while they laugh at the idea, science quietly confirms what they mock. Recessive traits only rise in isolated populations. That's not mythology, that's evolutionary biology. It's called a genetic bottleneck. European populations, especially those descending from the last ice age, are genetically linked to a very small founder group, likely less than 200 individuals. And when you isolate a population, what happens? The weaker traits that would normally be masked by dominant melanin, start to express. Red hair, pale skin, blue eyes, and lower levels of melanin come with consequences: weaker immune function, inability to absorb sunlight, higher rates of neurodegenerative disease. That's not opinion, that's peer-reviewed. The MC1R gene governs melanin expression. In melanin-dominant people, it regulates deep pigmentation, UV protection, and energy conversion. In melanin-recessive populations, mutations in this gene result in depigmentation, traits that make the body vulnerable in sunlight, mentally unstable under pressure, and cut off from vibrational memory. And here's the part that connects the science to the soul. Once Yaqub's creation reached critical mass, they were exiled into the caves of West Asia, what we now call Europe. There, in the cold, dark isolation of mountains and ice, survival wasn't about harmony, it was about domination. Over thousands of years, a culture emerged that saw nature not as divine, but as something to conquer. Scarcity bred greed. Sunlight became an enemy. And from this cauldron, the false systems we now live under were born. White supremacy, colonization, capitalism, it all traces back to a cold world mindset forged in those caves. So when they ask, where do white people really come from? The answer isn't just Europe, it's grafted mutation, it's selective survival, it's a legacy of trying to escape the sun, and the truth that lives in it. And that's why they still try to block it out, why they dim the skies with chemicals, why they can't exist without stealing our rhythm, our melanin, our memory. But what they forget is this: no matter how far you run from the sun, you can't escape the truth written in your origin. And now that truth is rising, again. Well, they didn't start in castles. They started in caves, not because they were chased there, but because the sun abandoned them. 21,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum, Europe was a frozen wasteland. Ice blanketed most of the land, pushing small human populations into narrow strips of livable terrain: southern France, parts of Spain, Greece. These weren't migrations of curiosity. These were retreats, survival moves. And in that cold, there wasn't abundance. There was scarcity. There wasn't community. There was competition. There wasn't sunlight. There was firelight, barely enough to see, barely enough to breathe. Generations were born and died in caves. The Franchthi Cave in Greece, occupied for over 30,000 years. The Theopetra Cave, showing unbroken human presence for over 50,000 years. Do you know what living in that much darkness does to a people? It trains the body to fear light. It trains the mind to distrust strangers. It breeds a culture of conquest, not communion. This isn't an opinion. This is documented anthropology. Archaeologists have confirmed these Ice Age bottlenecks shrank their gene pools, intensified recessive traits, and shaped behavior. Science calls it the clash model: climate, aggression, and self-control in humans. The colder the environment, the more aggressive and short-sighted the behavior became. You know what that sounds like? Colonization, conquest, control. Let's be clear, this isn't a moral judgment. It's a psychological scar buried in their ancestral memory. A scar that shaped their myths, their architecture, their economies, and their empires. They crawled out of those caves, desperate for control, not because they were evil, but because they were disconnected from the sun, from the earth, from memory. So when you ask why they erase, why they conquer, why they fear the melanin rich, understand, they come from a culture of ice, stone, and scarcity. We come from abundance, from rhythm, from sun, and now they call us savage? They built their worldview in a cave. We built pyramids aligned to stars. So no, this isn't just about skin color. This is about memory versus amnesia, abundance versus fear, and whether you're still living in a cave or walking back into the light. They say melanin is just pigment, but pigment doesn't regulate neurons. It doesn't shield DNA from mutation. It doesn't convert solar energy into bioelectric memory. Melanin does. Melanin is the molecule of survival, of sovereignty. It is light captured in flesh. The reason our bodies don't just survive in sunlight, we thrive in it. Melanin absorbs over 99.9% of harmful ultraviolet radiation. It neutralizes free radicals, protects the skin, the blood, the reproductive system, preserves folate, essential for life, and it optimizes vitamin D synthesis, the hormone tied to immunity, bone strength, and mood regulation. But this is deeper than sunscreen science. Inside your brain lives a darker secret, neuromelanin. Concentrated in the substantia nigra, it regulates dopamine, movement, memory, and joy. It binds iron, sequesters toxins, guards the neurons from degeneration. When neuromelanin starts to die, so does the brain. Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, cognitive decline. These are not random. They are consequences of the loss of molecular protection. Melanin is not passive. It is intelligent. It is a semiconductor, a biochemical conduit of energy. It can absorb, store, and convert light. It may even facilitate electromagnetic communication within the nervous system. This is why our bodies feel electric in the sun, why rhythm lives in our bones, why ancestral memory emerges when we close our eyes and feel the light through our skin. And this is why they fear it. This week, we watched two faces of that fear go viral. Sydney Sweeney, front and center in American Eagle's My Jeans Are Blue campaign. But everyone heard what they were really saying. My jeans are blue, wrapped in denim, sold as fashion, coded as supremacy. The blonde-haired, blue-eyed archetype still being positioned as the default. Not because of beauty, but because of genetic insecurity. Then there's Eric Orwell, co-founder of a whites-only settlement initiative called Return to the Land. His ideology? That white people must isolate themselves to survive. That diversity is a threat. That their existence must be preserved through separation. This is eugenics, not in lab coats, but in genes and real estate. Sydney and Eric are pushing the same fear, that proximity to melanin means extinction. That purity must be preserved, even if it's based on scientific lies. But here's what real science says. The Human Genome Project proved that all humans share 99.9% of the same DNA. Skin color is controlled by a tiny number of genes. There's more genetic variation within racial groups than between them. There is no superior race. There is no pure bloodline. What they fear is not replacement. What they fear is irrelevance. Because melanin-rich people are not behind. We are ahead. We adapt faster. We absorb more. We remember more. And while they're burning under UV rays, we're decoding light into information. That's the real reason behind solar dimming projects. That's why they spray the skies. That's why vitamin D deficiency is killing their communities. Because the sun is not their ally, it is their adversary. And still, they call us the problem. They sell blue-eyed nostalgia while their bones cry out for calcium. They fear our DNA while secretly mining it for medical solutions. They want our culture, our rhythm, our genius, without acknowledging the source. They can't create what we carry. They can't clone what is cosmically encoded. So instead, they reduce melanin to just skin tone, while quietly studying its role in neurology, metabolism, and electromagnetic resonance. They call it pigment, but it's protection, conduction, ascension. We don't just survive the sun. We speak to it. We transmute it. We radiate it. And as the solar flares rise and the veils get thinner and the nervous system of this planet begins to spark again, those with melanin will find themselves tuning in, not out. Because this isn't about race. It's about resonance. And the more melanin you carry, the more language you share with light itself. That's the real divide. Not skin, not status, but signal. The serpent they follow was never a bringer of wisdom, only a master of inversion. In the garden, the serpent didn't liberate, he lured. He offered false godhood, a counterfeit awakening that severed man from source. You shall not surely die, a lie so seductive it reshaped history. John 8:44 doesn't stutter. You are of your father the devil. He was a murderer from the beginning. When he lies, he speaks his native language. That's not poetry. That's paternity. The serpent didn't offer knowledge. He offered rebellion against divinity, and they've been worshiping that rebellion ever since. Now track with me, because this gets deeper than Sunday school. In the Gnostic texts, the serpent archetype mutates into something broader: the archons, rulers born from a false creator, Yaldabaoth, who fashioned himself as God but was cut off from the Most High. These archons govern through fear, illusion, imitation. They're the authors of false religions, false democracies, false light. The serpent never creates, it copies, co-ops, corrupts. They hijacked sacred geometry, rewired it into mind prisons. They distorted divine gender, rebranded it as ideology. They don't guide, they gaslight. Now listen, Hebrew Israelite doctrine exposes this even more clearly. Esau didn't just birth Edom, he merged with the Canaanites, the Hittites, the serpent seed lines. He inherited a legacy of spiritual warfare, not covenant. This is the bloodline of scarcity, conquest, empire, the ones who trade the eternal for the temporary and call it evolution. This is why the systems they build are always cold, always calculating. They worship intellect divorced from spirit, AI over intuition, surveillance over sovereignty. It's not technology, they're birthing digital archons. The false light just went Wi-Fi. Look around, Sydney Sweeney becomes the blonde Venus of eugenics, flaunting jeans in denim while pushing genetic nostalgia for empire. Eric Orwell calls for return to the land, but means return to racial purity. Same doctrine, new packaging. Both carry the signature of the smoke serpent: separation, supremacy, sterilized soul. Even their skies reflect it. They dim the sun not just for climate control, but to block frequencies that awaken us. Chemtrails are ritual. Aluminum isn't just metal, it's mimicry, a false mirror in the heavens. They know light carries memory, and melanin is the key to decoding it. You see, the serpent's children didn't build civilization. They survived it, in caves, in scarcity. And when they emerged, they rewrote every scroll, flipped every symbol, and taught you to fear your own power. They gave you Sunday sermons while practicing Saturnian magic in private. They made you hate the serpent in you, the kundalini, the DNA coil, the inner awakening, and follow their serpent instead, the deceiver, the architect of spiritual debt. But that time is collapsing. We are not children of smoke. We are children of sun, of source, of symmetry. Their false light is flickering. Tomorrow, we expose the next phase, how they forged alliances with the serpent to control nations, redefine God, and engineer extinction behind the veil of enlightenment. Let the world choke on their illusions. We're breathing truth. They say they built civilization, but they didn't. They inherited it. After the flood, after the fall, after the flame of ancient brilliance had been dimmed and repackaged with pale hands and false tongues. Let's get something straight. The modern white phenotype, light skin, blonde hair, blue eyes, is new. We're talking no more than 6,000 years old. Peer-reviewed genetic studies confirm that the SLC24A5 gene mutation, one of the major determinants of lighter skin, didn't even show up in European populations until around 6,000 years ago, near the Black Sea. Before that, the people of Europe, if they were there at all, were darker-skinned hunter-gatherers, still trying to figure out the rhythm of the earth, while the rest of us had already written semis with it. And yet, they teach you that history begins when they show up. That civilization was born in Greece. That science was born in the Enlightenment. That law was born in Rome. But let me remind you, Greece studied Kemet. Rome conquered Carthage, and Europe stole libraries from the Moors and burned them to hide their own ignorance. The Indus Valley civilization, running urban plumbing before Europe even had wooden huts. Mesopotamia, charting stars, crafting laws, cultivating grain in harmony with the heavens. Olmec cities in the Americas, aligned with constellations, with colossal heads that still defy explanation. Cahokia and the Mississippi Mound Builders, massive earthen pyramids, urban planning, sacred geometry spread across what is now the US, long before Columbus ever breathed. Kemet, divine geometry, spiritual technology, and the seat of sacred science that birthed medicine, mathematics, and metaphysics. Every single cradle of civilization predates the emergence of modern Europeans. And guess what? All of them, every single one, was birthed and built by melanated peoples. Not just Africans, but Aboriginal Americans, Dravidians, Nubians, Ainu, and other sun-born beings who lived in sync with the cycles, not in caves hiding from them. This isn't Afrocentrism. This is geological fact, genetic fact, historical record. The real world, not the rewritten one. See, the Cold World mind didn't invent civilization. It industrialized it, it mechanized it, it sterilized it. And now they parade it around like they built it from scratch. They dress in stolen silks, speak in stolen tongues, praise gods they renamed and repackaged from those they once demonized. They fear what they didn't create. They fear what they can't recreate. Because at the root of all this, the wars, the monuments, the museums, the missions, is this quiet truth. They are the youngest version of humanity. And they know it. The mutation of light skin, the thinning of the nose, the straightening of the hair. These were environmental adaptations to life in caves and cold. But they also came at a cost. Melanin is not just skin color, it is neurological, spiritual, photonic. It absorbs energy, stores memory, transmits light. To lose it is not to lose beauty, it is to lose signal. And this is why, even after all the conquest, all the colonizing, all the domination, they still feel empty. Still seeking sun they can't hold. Still building tech they hope can simulate soul. Still hiding truth they fear would wake the sleeping gods in our blood. You ever wonder why they gatekeep history? Why every ancient sculpture's nose is broken off? Why museums are packed with artifacts they say they discovered but could never recreate? Why ancient Americas are falsely labeled as empty until 1492? Because they didn't build civilization. They interrupted it. They cracked the code long enough to profit from it, then called the rest of us savages. But now the memory is returning. Now the bones beneath the soil are whispering again. Now the copper-colored children of this land, the original architects, are rising. And not with vengeance, with vision. Because the truth isn't just that they didn't build this world, it's that they're terrified we'll remember we did. And when we do, they won't be able to explain how their oldest monuments still stand, but their newest systems are already crumbling. So let them have their last days in the sun, because the solar memory in our bones never forgot its throne, and the night is almost over. You can already feel the warmth returning. Now, you see why they fear extinction, and why they'll do anything to silence what comes next. They're not saving the planet. They're waging war on the sun, because the sun is waging war on their time. Every streak across the sky, not just clouds. Every strange haze, every blood-red sunset, every once-in-a-lifetime flood that hits every year, engineered. Bill Gates, Harvard's COPEX, stratospheric aerosol injection, public record. The U.S. National Academies of Sciences has detailed plans to dim the sun with aerosols like aluminum, barium, and sulfur dioxide. Environmental research letters confirmed in 2018. This is real, not sci-fi. Meanwhile, China fires up an artificial sun hotter than the real one. DARPA tests weather modification. Raytheon and Northrop Grumman run cloud seeding contracts across the globe. Rain stolen from one region, floods dumped on another. Crops wiped out, supply chains snapped, wrapped in the PR spin of climate action. Why? They claim it's to cool the earth. The truth? To slow the rise of the people the sun strengthens, not weakens. Melanated people. Globally, less than 15% of the population is white. And white isn't an ancient bloodline. It's a recent adaptation. About 6,000 years ago, two gene variants, SLC24A5 and SLC45A2, stripped eumelanin from the skin, creating pale complexions. This wasn't an upgrade. It was survival in low light after the Ice Age. Before that, Europeans didn't look like the textbook portraits. Cheddar Man, 10,000 years old, found in England, had dark brown skin, curly hair, and blue eyes. Even Europe's earliest farmers were melanated. Whiteness didn't exist when the first cities, pyramids, or written languages appeared. But those who survived the Ice Age carried 2 to 4% Neanderthal DNA, confirmed in nature, science advances, and Cell. Neanderthals were cold-adapted hominins, low sociability, high aggression, short limbs, light skin and hair, poor adaptation to solar cycles. They weren't the builders of great civilizations. They were hunters of scarcity, fading out when the climate changed. But instead of disappearing, their genome lived on through interbreeding with Homo sapiens. That genetic inheritance, fragile and recessive, sparked a panic when they realized they were a global minority. Enter eugenics. Francis Galton, Charles Davenport, Harry Laughlin, Ernst Rudin, funded by Rockefeller Carnegie, forced sterilizations of Black, Indigenous, and immigrant women. Racial hygiene laws, The Nazis copied it from the United States, but the math was against them. You can't preserve a recessive trait forever in a world moving closer to the sun. So the strategy shifted. Control the sky, control the climate, control who thrives. And here's the part they bury in classified research. Melanin is not just pigment, it's a living technology. Eumelanin, the deep brown-black pigment, doesn't just block UV, it converts it into energy and shields DNA. Neuromelanin in the brain connects sunlight to memory, rhythm, creativity. Pheomelanin, dominant in pale skin, burns, degrades, and offers little defense. Melanin is a superconductor, magnetic, alive. That's why they've studied it for decades, patented it, harvested it, tried to synthesize it, and failed. Because melanin isn't a static molecule, it's a biological archive. That's why our ancestors aligned monuments with the cosmos. Pyramids of Kemet aligned with Orion's belt. Cahokia's mounds marked solstices. Olmec heads faced celestial events. Copper-colored Americans built entire cities tuned to solar and magnetic cycles. We weren't worshiping the sun, we were working with it, in contract with it. Our life force was in rhythm with the universe. They fear the sun because it strips away their advantage and reactivates ours. And here's what's happening right now. Solar activity is spiking. UV levels are climbing. The magnetic poles are shifting. Earth's resonance is accelerating. For them, it's a ticking clock. Fertility collapse, skin cancers, DNA breakdown. The Neanderthal echo replaying itself. For us, it's a reset, memory reactivating, rhythm returning, the God particles switch back on. They can choke the horizon with chemical trails. They can seed clouds and steal rain. They can build suns in laboratories. But they can't stop the source. They can't freeze the cycle. And they cannot stop the rise. Day 7 isn't just their expiration date. It's the sunrise we've been waiting for. The sun is rising. And no matter what they do, so are we.